Welcome to Ruger Tech Tips. I'm going to show you how to clean your Ruger small frame AR rifle. Pretty simple process. Before we begin, I want to make sure there's no live ammo in my work area, in the magazine, or in the rifle. So first thing I'm going to do is going to check the rifle, and I'm going to physically and visibly check the chamber where there's no live ammo there. I'm going to check the magazine and in my work area. So we're good. So we're going to start the cleaning process. A couple things you're going to need. Some type of a cleaning rod. You could use a flexible cleaning system. So I'm going to use a cleaning rod with the appropriate jags and brushes. Now this is a 308, so I'm using a 30 caliber jag here. You're going to need a good cleaner. There's lots of good choices out there as far as cleaners go. Some type of gun oil and some type of grease. I've got a couple different choices here. You really only need one type of, whether it's synthetic grease or what have you, to get into those smooth bearing surface parts. Some type of good small brush works good. Pipe cleaners on this system works good. The appropriate size patches. One type of rag just to wipe off excess debris, and one that's oil soaked that you can just wipe down exterior parts with. And of course, a good pair of safety glasses. So to begin with, what I typically like to do, and this being a gas impingement system, they can get pretty dirty. I often will start with the parts that get the dirtiest or have the most amount of carbon built up and whatnot. Typically it is your bolt, and in a lot of cases it's your regulator. So what I typically will do is I will hit these parts early on. Now this rifle is fairly clean. I will hit these with some solvent and just set them aside so they can kind of soak for a little bit. I'll hit my port here where the regulator goes into, and I'll hit that and I'll let those soak while I do all the other cleaning processes. That way that's working on that area there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush and I'm put it on the end of my cleaning rod, and I'm going to soak that down with some solvent, and I'm going to run it through the bore. And you always want to go from the chamber end through. So I'm going to run this through, and I'm going to run this through a few times. And I'll scrub that out a number of times, and then I'm going to switch to a jag, a cleaning jag, and I'm going to run a patch through it. And it's more or less a process of just repeating that as you go along until your patch comes out nice and clean. You see that comes out pretty filthy. And you're essentially just going to repeat this process of running the brush through and the patches through, running more solvent through that until eventually those patches come out nice and clean. Once you're finally done, we're going to run an oil-soaked patch through there, and I'll do that in a second. The other thing you want to do is, if you have a chamber brush, I would run that in. I would do that prior to running the oil-soaked patch through. People often forget to clean the chambers out, and a lot of times you pull that debris back into the chamber and it dumps off in there. So you really want to get in there and clean those chambers out. Make sure those are nice and clean last. Get those nice and clean. And finally, you would just use a very light viscosity oil on a patch. You don't want to go crazy with this, just a very light amount, just to coat the bore. Just to coat the bore in the chamber, and that's about it. That's about all you need to do. Again, you're going to do, I'm doing this much quicker than you would probably do. You want to do this repeated until that comes out nice and clean. So for the rest of this, you're going to wipe this down with an oil-soaked rag. You're going to coat everything down. This hole here is where your regulator goes in, and I would coat that with some solvent, and I would get in there and I would clean that out. A bronze phosphorus brush is good for that. I wouldn't go stainless. I would shy away from that, but get in there and get that cleaned out. You might be able to use a Q-tip in there. If you're going to store the rifle for any length of time, a little bit of oil in there is good. You can also run some solvent down through your gas tube down in there and then blow that out with some compressed air. But minimal to no oil in your gas tube here into where your regulator is, especially if you're going to go immediately and shoot the rifle, because the amount of gas pressure that goes through there, any kind of oil in there, you're just going to blow that out. So really you're protecting it from the elements rather than from any part-on-part wear. Just not an issue there. So wipe everything down, all the exterior, and your inside here. Nice coat of oil. Drop of oil on our forward assist, get that working good. I'm going to set that aside. Then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to work on my bolt. So you'll get a lot of carbon built up behind the gas rings in this area. You can use a good brush there. A stainless steel brush is not an issue. Sometimes the round brushes work good at taking all that carbon off. You're going to wipe this all down, get all of that carbon off of there. Soak up, whether you use a Q-tip or a pipe cleaner or something like that, get through there up into the firing pin channel, get that cleaned out. And then a very, very light viscosity oil, a very minimal amount of oil through that. You're really, again, you're just protecting it from the elements. You don't need to have that really, really drippy wet with oil. Get in with a brush and some solvent. You're going to clean out your channel where your extractor goes, your bolt face. You're again going to wipe this all down, get all the extra debris off. A light coat of oil on that. A very small amount of oil on your two plungers, which are your ejectors. And let those work down in. The extractor itself, on the extractor, this lip edge here gets a lot of debris under it. So you want to make sure that's nice and clean. Wipe that down. Firing pins, those usually aren't that bad as far as dirty goes. Again, you can probably wipe those down. Very minimal amount of oil. And no more than you would coat the outside of the rifle with. Our carrier itself, this hole in here, can get some debris in there. I typically will hit that with some solvent. I'll spray some solvent in there, give it a few squirts. And then a lot of times I'll use a chamber brush, but in reverse. I'll just go the other end. I can get in there, I can get that cleaned out. I can get in there with a patch or something and just wipe out the interior of that, get that cleaned out. Wipe all the extra debris off there. For the lower, this is pretty simple to clean. You do not necessarily have to take the whole lower apart. What you can do is you can put this to the fire position, and then what you're going to do is hold your thumb on the hammer, slightly depress it, pull the trigger, and you're going to ease that up. Don't let it slam forward. Now you have access to get in there with some solvent, spray that in. If you have a can of compressed air, you can blow out any debris that's inside there. And then a couple drops of oil on the pivot point. So your hammer pivot, trigger pivot, your disconnector pivot, your two pins, your takedown pin and your pivot pin, and the safety. And I would do a small amount of grease on this flat face of the hammer. That's a flat bearing surface. The grease sticks there. It's got some body. Oil really doesn't have anything to stick to, so the grease has a little bit more body. And there's lots of choices on grease out there. All I do is put a small amount of grease on there. It does not need a lot, just that amount. Just get some on your fingers, you wipe it on the part. You really need no more than that. So again, and then you would wipe down the entire exterior with an oil-coated rag and you're good to go. Now on lubricating these, again for grease, this flat on the bottom here, where again the hammer rides, a little bit around the bearing surface here because that rides inside the receiver, and a little bit down the sides. And again, you get some on your hands, that is enough to get on these parts. People tend to over lubricate, and it does not take a lot of lubrication to keep this rifle up and running. The firing pin I mentioned earlier, really just wipe it down. That's the most amount of oil lubrication that needs. Wipe down all your exterior parts and you should be good to go. There's another Ruger Tech Tip video on how to reassemble your rifle. If you jump to that, you can see how to put this back together again. Thanks for watching this Ruger Tech Tip.